Hey everyone, welcome to Pastor's Podcast Season 3. I'm banning Liebscher. We have the honor this season of partnering with World Vision. World Vision is a Christian humanitarian organization, and we get to partner with them to serve children and families around the world that are dealing with poverty and injustice. Fueled by rising costs, extreme weather, the pandemic, and regional conflicts, including the war in Ukraine, global hunger has reached unprecedented levels in every continent. Over 21 million children are at risk and facing starvation. To put that in perspective, that's the combined populations of New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Phoenix, and Philadelphia. As World Food Program's largest food distribution partner, World Vision is responding in 25 of the hardest hit countries, aiming to reach 22 million people through the biggest humanitarian response in their 72-year history. This may seem ambitious, but we are convinced that this is possible with the help of donors, listeners, and partners just like you. Your one-time donation can provide life-saving resources such as emergency food supplies, urgent treatment for severely malnourished children, training, resources, and access to clean water to help families grow their own food, as well as education and support to help moms provide balanced meals. At Jesus Culture, we have always had the mandate to call the church to engage these issues around the world. In fact, the Bible is very clear about the part we're to play in taking care of the poor and the oppressed around the world. We are called to be part of the solution. Whether you want to give on your own, with your family, community group, or as a church, your one-time donation to the World Vision Fund will create lasting change alongside kids and communities around the world, including real families facing real hunger in some of the hardest places to be a child. I just want to say thank you for partnering with us to see this happen. You can give now by visiting worldvision.org/JCPN and donate today. Welcome to Pastor's Podcast Season 3, part of the Jesus Culture Podcast Network. Really, what we're doing with the podcast is we just want to come alongside pastors. Right. Not just pastors, anybody who's in the trenches of the local church, got skin in the game, building the local church. We just believe so deeply in what God is doing. And I just think it's so important that it's just a podcast. But can we be encouraged together? Can we be challenged together? Can we be equipped together? So that's what we're doing. I'm banning Liebscher, the pastor of Jesus Culture. Sometimes I say founder and pastor because it just sounds more dramatic. Founder and pastor. They don't know really what that means.
Well, after the pandemic, we need terms that make us feel better about ourselves.
Absolutely. Right? Well, what I used to do, because people would be for years, this is a true story, and I don't want to get into this right now, but for years, people knew the music, had no idea who I was. Yeah. Well, still, that's probably the case, but still. But so we would be traveling all over the world, though, and they'd be like, I don't know who you are. I know who Kim is. I know who Chris is. I had a guy to youth pastors. We did a youth pastors gathering on tour. And the guy goes, hey, who are you? I said, Banny, and I'm with Jesus Culture. He goes, are you the sound guy? Yes, I was the sound guy. And I just want to go, Kim and Chris wouldn't have even happened without me, little punk. So founder and pastor of Jesus Culture, Banny Liebscher, joined by Doug Lasit, pastor in Denver, Colorado of the Pearl.
Is he the founding pastor?
I am the founding pastor. Okay. I am the episcopos.
Yes.
The presbyteros. Season 3, by the way, season 3, I had this thought this morning. Each season has gotten better.
Yes.
It has.
Yeah.
Because season 1 was more the season of season 1 at the end of the pandemic. I think this has gotten better because pastors are getting healthier.
Yeah.
And so I think this has been really good.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
That's great to have you. And we love the name of your church. Everybody's agreed the name of your church is pretty cool. Pretty cool. And then we're joined by good friend Jon Tyson out there, Church of the City in New York. Jon, good to have you with us.
Good to see you.
Thank you, founding pastor of Church of the City.
Listen, let me tell you a Jon Tyson story. So I was talking to Corey Russell, who Jon loves, and Corey was on, he's on this season, and we love Corey, phenomenal preacher. But Jon asked me to come preach at their church a while ago, and so I went out there. And Jon, if you've ever heard Jon, and Jon's sitting here, I'm going to talk about him like he's not here. If you've ever heard Jon, I mean, and I'm not just saying this to a phenomenal communicator, a great preacher, passion for God, passion for revival, but just smart, sharp, well-read, not just well-read, lot-read. I don't know what that means,
That's how they say it in Kentucky. I'm lot-read.
I'm a lot-read.
I'm a lot-read too.
I'm lot-read too.
So I go out to New York City, which is, and I'm out there, and I go out there, and I spoke a word, and I'm telling like stupid, silly illustrations and stories, and we're talking about community, and I literally am thinking people are going like, who is this guy? So I go back again recently, and I told Corey, I said, Corey, I'm going out there with I'm going to have about 6 references from not just theologians, but philosophers.
You're
that
like
I've
working
read,
really hard to make sure you fit into the
here's
culture.
Some philosophers, and then it didn't happen again. I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
I just couldn't go there. So, but I tell you what, we're going to talk about pioneering today. Jon, when I was with you last, I kid you not, the rawness of New York City. Like just the rawness
I love it.
Of having a church in New York City, being mobile still. It actually inspired me. I'm sure it wears you out. I'm sure it's wearing you out. I went home like refreshed and inspired again for that raw pioneer reaching people kind of thing.
I love New York City, Jon. I love New York City because like hospitality or like customer service, sometimes it just doesn't exist. And sometimes we just need that. You go into a restaurant and they're like, what do you want? You want some food? You don't want to eat? You don't have to be here. You know what I mean?
How do you handle that as an Australian?
Let me tell you a very quick story. I went and ordered coffee and the guy said to me, you're Australian? I said, yes. He said, but you've lived in New York a long time. I said, really? How do you know? I said, if I lost my accent? He said, no, the way you order, you're so aggressive. Oh. I said, thank you.
Do you enjoy that? Do you enjoy that now?
Oh, I don't even see it, mate. I think what had happened, I walked into the coffee shop and I was like, let me get a black Americano. That was it. Like I literally walked and said, let me get a black Americano. That sounds so normal. Not, hey man, how's it going? How are you doing today? Tell me about the deep state of your heart.
Yes.
Really? Just like, let me get a black Americano.
Because that's how Jesus would order a coffee, just hardcore.
I love
have you found it like to be kind of endearing now that you've lived there?
Oh, let me tell you, the person who is speaking the fastest and getting straight to the details of the story is my person. Start with the action.
He's already
yeah. Let's go. Let's go. Start the action.
He's already lost. This podcast has already gone too far.
I'm super excited.
Except in your preaching.
I'm excited about this.
Long preaching.
I'm excited about this. Let's go.
Hey, here's why we're doing this podcast. We usually don't have back-to-back guests. Jon was on our podcast, I think, last season, and
deconstruction. All the easy topics.
Yeah, all the easy topics. But I mentioned I was with Jon recently, and we were just having coffee in the morning and began to talk about, just in conversation, began to talk about pioneering and just what it takes in ministry and pioneering and sacrifice. And I was actually struck. I actually went away a little bit, and we had this conversation. I said, somehow we have to have this conversation with pastors. And we can get into this thing a little bit and kind of, your story, Jon. I have pioneer in me with all we do with Jesus Culture. Our church plant story is less pioneering, to be fair. To be fair, our church plant story is a little less pioneering. I came with a whole bunch of famous worship leaders and a name and all that.
Yeah, sounds rough.
Yeah, but I do realize that as you get older, more established, and a little more comfortable in ministry, you can begin to lose that pioneer edge, that pioneer spirit. As well as this next generation. So for those that have been in ministry for a long time, my concern is that you begin to lose that pioneer edge. You actually begin to lose that risk-taking, faith, willing to put it on the line, willing to sacrifice. I think entitlement begins to creep in. I think that, all that stuff. And then for the younger generation that we have the responsibility to pour into and raise up, there is like, some of them are just starting there. I call a little bit of it kind of second generation money, You know, it's that second generation money with I saw it in our own ministry, that first wave of people, and then the second wave of leaders that came in. Right. I mean, we never had hotels we were staying in. We were staying in people's houses on couches when we were starting. But then that second wave comes in, and now we're in hotels. And so it's just that, you know, that kind of thing. So I would love to, can you guys quickly just give your story? You don't have to give your whole story, but can you give a little bit of context of the planting process? And then I would love just to have that conversation around why we believe we need to be having this conversation about pioneering. Jon, tell us a little bit about New York.
You know, so number one, I am the deepest part of my being is a pioneering revivalist.
Right.
17 years old, up at 4 a.m., praying in Rundle Mall, taking communion on my knees, praying for revival in the city like Smith Wigglesworth. Dropped out of high school when I was 16, got a great work ethic, manual labor, working in a meat factory. Very grateful for those years, very formative about a work ethic. Got a scholarship to America when I was 20, heard about church planting in my early 20s. Moved to New York when I was 28 after a decent run in student ministry. And I remember distinctly thinking, hey, as a non-denominational charismatic Christian, whose permission do I need? And turns out, God's. I say that, like if I was a Lutheran, I would have planted a Lutheran church. If I was in a denomination, I would have planted a denominational church. It's actually quite hard to join a denomination. This is pre the world of loose networks. That's when you had to go to one of their schools. And so I was just like, you know what, we're just going to go.
Loose networks. Look at him throw out loose networks.
Well, if we stop on everything.
Yeah, we can. Keep going.
Okay, so I was like, you know what, we've got one shot to plant this church. So here was our pioneering story. Lord, should we did it? I did a 40-day fast. Yes or no? Am I going to New York? Last day of the fast, I come home. I'm getting ready to go in and have dinner to break the fast. I go to my mailbox. There's a massive anonymous check that says, pay off your debts and do what's in your heart. So that was my confirmation at the end of a 40-day fast.
Wow.
Then I bought a house right before the housing market crashed.
Right.
And so when we sold it at the absolute peak of the market. How did this money? It's actually a story I actually never tell anybody, this next part. I had a co-planter who was going to come with me. We were both going to sell our houses, put all the money in the middle, do a book of Acts, and pay everybody on our planting team's debts off. It was 10 people. So he bailed right at the last minute. And my wife and I looked at each other and said, do we pay the debts off like the book of Acts or not? And we said, stuff it, let's do it. So we took all of our money that we made on our house, a big 6-figure amount of money, paid off everybody's debts personally, like the book of Acts, started a Bible study in my apartment. The first 4 years, we lived in 580 square feet with 2 roommates, 2 kids, and 2 dogs. And that's how we could afford to live in New York City. And
they still live there. They still live there today. They don't. But keep going.
But I mean, it was like we thought we were having the most fun, living the most joyous life.
Right.
We could imagine. Yeah, was there horrific pain, betrayal, heartache? Yes. But we were just like, what else would you want to do with your youth? What else would you want to do with a windfall of money?
Come on.
So we just went all in, mate. You said we get one chance to go all in for the kingdom of God. The Apostle Paul said, I do not consider my life worth anything to myself. And so we were just like, let's go in. My wife is built for this. She is a pioneer at heart. And my kids were raised in it. My kids were raised in extraordinary sacrifice. I'll tell you something interesting. My son, this morning, I dropped him off at the airport to fly back to Kona. He's at YWAM. And he said to me, I want to say thank you for giving me a missionary inheritance.
Oh, gosh.
Wow.
Oh, come on.
He said, I didn't even realize it. You know, he said, I feel called to missions, and I didn't even realize it, that you sold everything and moved to this country as a missionary. And I was raised as a missionary's kid.
Wow.
I want to say thank you. So amazing.
Yeah, there's truth in that.
Gosh, that had to have been
wild.
Yeah, that had been felt good. Doug, what's your story?
Well, my wife Donna and I were in Portland for 20 years. My wife's a missionary kid from Africa. We were with in Portland with Pastor Frank and all the crew over there for a long time. We planted in 2009. in the middle of the recession. We actually lost all the money on our house, so we lost everything. And we just decided that if we can pioneer.
So you didn't pay everybody's debts off?
No, I didn't pay it. Well, I didn't really have anybody.
That's interesting.
So that's the other.
Like you had a team.
He goes, you had a team to pay off debts?
Yeah, that sounds exciting. No, but we got there and it was incredible. But we figured if we can start in the worst economy, there's nowhere to go but up. Right. That was one of our thoughts. But without getting into it,
was that true?
You know, it really was. It really was, because as the economy changed, there was an effect there, right?
Yeah.
But as I'm listening, what I'm thinking is that now I started a little older. We talked about this yesterday. I pioneered at 41.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. At 41. So one of my heroes, Wendell Smith, who was my father, the Lord, he planted in Seattle at 42. So I thought, if he can do it, we can do it. And so the benefit of that was, we arrive on a Friday. Of course, this was just pre all the other like loose networks and church planning stuff. I'm like, I arrive on Friday. I'm like, we're taking an offering on Sunday, or we're not going to make it, right?
Yes.
And we went to IKEA and we bought these little metal buckets for the offering, which was the worst decision in the world, because if you can hear the money hit the bottom of a metal bucket, it's small. You know what I mean? You're getting change with your 11 people. So, but I didn't wake up on Sunday morning and go, gosh, I wonder how to do ministry.
Yeah,
I didn't feel like I had to go take a workshop.
What's my leadership philosophy?
I didn't have to do that. So on one hand, I think starting a little later might be better in sometimes, but the way I look at it is this. I'm playing off something you said. I think that there's a difference between a pioneer and a settler. The difference between a pioneer and a settler is that the settlers come in and they build and they live in what's already being built, but a pioneer, all they have is the tools that they bring with them to build. Pioneers bring tools, they don't bring stuff. And so I feel like, man, Jon, so good. Just that pioneering spirit, those tools. So we leaned into the tools because we didn't have anything else to lean into. And ultimately, I think that worked out. It's been a good journey.
Let's talk to pastors and church leaders that have been around for a while. And I found myself just recently even, you begin to, maybe not you, me, I can feel myself sometimes wanting to shift into safe mode a little bit more, a little bit. I was saying this, and Jon, you might, both of you guys would recognize this. When you're younger and you say yes, you actually don't know the cost of the yes. It's a yes that's not connected to an awareness of the cost of the yes. It's a zealous yes. It's an excited yes. It's a genuine yes. Like, it is a genuine yes before the Lord.
Yeah.
But as you get older, you begin to recognize as well, there's a real cost to that yes. So as I get older, my yes is more mature in that it has a deeper understanding. And so sometimes you kind of like, do I want to play it a little bit more safe? Do I want to fully take that risk? Do I want to lay it all out there on that? Now I've got a staff and they've got families and there's insurance involved for them. And there's there's reputation that, like, we didn't have a reputation back then either. That's another thing that's a little bit weird is you're like, I remember when we were making, I'll use worship as an example. We were doing worship music. Nobody even knew who we were.
Right.
So nobody's even looking at us. We're just out there doing it.
Just do it.
And then all of a sudden there's people that are looking at us and another album's come in and they're writing a review on it and they've got an opinion on it. And so that risk taking when nobody was even looking at us. Nobody was looking at us, So I guess my point is, as we get older, I think you can fall into that thing. And it scares me. Is that the right word? I'm like, dude, I do not want to fall into that thing.
Yeah.
What would we say, both of you guys, Jon, I'll start with you and then go to Doug. What would you both say to those people that have been in ministry for a while? And without maybe knowing it, or slowly falling into a little bit more of that safe place, a little bit more of that less risk, a little bit more of that not pioneer?
Well, several things hit me at once. Number one, Patrick Lencioni's new book, The Motive. He's got another one coming out, but he basically talks about leadership. Leadership is not a reward. And he says a lot of folks think like, hey, I can't wait to take on more leadership because my life is going to get better. And he says, no, it's actually taking on more leadership means you're accepting more responsibility. And so a lot of folks get more leadership, but they don't want to do the job that is leading.
Yes.
They want the reward of the perks of leadership. That's a great book just to sort of sit with and think, because a lot of folks who've ended up with any measure of influence, like, never set out to get the influence. They set out to do the ministry.
Right.
And I think a lot of folks can be attracted to the fruit of a ministry, not the vision or the founding of it. Secondly, just trying to keep that first love culture. That Ephesian church, they built a lot of good stuff. Good doctrine. It's just, you're working harder than you did at first. You've tested those who claim to be apostles, but they're not. But I have this against you. You've left your first love. Do the things you did at first. So fighting for that first love culture, I think, is really important. But then thirdly, I think you got to, I remember very, very consciously, I am like somewhat known in my circles for having, like working a lot. Like, I love what I do. I view it as a sense of mission and call. But I remember when I hit 40 going like, oh, the recovery time's a little longer. Wow, that hurt a little bit more. So I did try and make a conscious shift from what I call sacrificial energy to strategic energy, just that brute force, raw power of pioneering in your 20s, as opposed to being more intentional. So I think you want to get wiser in how you dumb sacrifice hurts people and doesn't advance the kingdom. But strategic sacrifice, I think, does advance the kingdom and keeps you in the game longer. So that, to me, it's a lot more discerning. Lord, what are you saying? Not just like, let's go and he'll bless what's in our heart. It's more like, Lord, what's in your heart and what are you saying? So those are probably the first three things that come to mind.
I think that's a key too, John, what you're describing, because the reason why first love is so important is because ultimately first love is what breeds and births obedience. I mean, cultivating that first love lifestyle results in, Jesus, I just want to do what you're telling me to do. I want to be obedient above all else. And I think if you really stay in that place of obedience, it will not only be strategic, but it will put you at, God is constantly calling you off the map. He's constantly calling you into places that are in over your head. And I think it's interesting you say that, John, because sometimes as the busyness of ministry and the weight of ministry and all the stuff of ministry, that first love lifestyle begins to dim a little bit, and we lose that edge of obedience. And maybe that's what I'm talking about. Maybe the pioneering part is just flat out obedience. It's just flat out, the Lord told me to go and I went, and no matter what the cost. You look like
it's the cost of obedience too. Yeah, I mean, it's not. A lot of people say yes, but I think it is that it's yes with sacrifice.
Yes.
It's yes with sacrifice. I mean, there's a lot of folks. I mean, everyone's got grace for the call they have, but I can tell you the number one reason why people have left New York is because they don't want to raise their families there.
Right.
Here's the thing: I don't even judge them. I totally get it.
You do, yeah, I totally get it.
But it is definitely one of those things that it's kind of like the yes is the yes. Everybody loves say New York is an example. Like, oh, wouldn't it be amazing to live in New York? Access to all that culture. It's a global city. Think of the museums and the parks, and yeah, the rent's high. And yeah, I mean, there's like radical godless ideology designed to basically steal your children's souls. Yeah, but the parks are so good that at some point all of that fun wears off, and you're left with the raw cost of inconvenience, and so that reorients you. So
this is already my favorite podcast.
A godless ideology that steals your soul's kids' souls. But the parks are so good.
No, you see at first. This is like the number one. This is a little bit of what we were talking about in Starbucks. Is when you cast a vision of what God's put in your heart. Like people on my team say, like, what are we doing here? And here's my answer. We are bending Western culture towards redemption. That's my answer. So it's like, what are we doing? It's like, when Evan Roberts prayed, oh, bend us. I'm like, let's bend the whole thing.
Yeah.
So can we do that? No, only God can. But that sounds amazing. You think about, but then when you actually have to push against satanic steel.
Yeah.
for 20 years with fasting, intercession, betrayal, and sacrifice and see nothing, people actually, I think I just want a different life.
And I think this is where, I'm thinking about church planters and how church plant, and we talk with a lot of church planters, but guys are told, hey, listen, success means that you have to have a minimum of 250 people at your church plant. So if you don't have 250 people at your church, so everybody's working towards a number and they're working towards an ideal that they've been taught in a formula in a workshop. But what they're not being told is that the sacrifice that it's going to take when you're, because the smallest service in a church plant's history, they say this, and it was true for us, is the second service. Everybody shows up on the first service to cheer you on. The second service, they're all gone. But it's that sacrificial piece that they don't understand. We're building churches according to a formula, and we don't understand the cost that it takes to carry that out.
It's interesting.
It's a sacrificial thing.
I just had a board meeting last night, and it was let's talk through your 3 to 5 year vision for the church. And one closing comment that the chair of our board said was this: it's interesting. You don't have a single goal or comment about weekend services or metrics.
Yeah.
They said, that's interesting.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, I mean, the goal is not, here's what's not worth sacrificing for, okay? This is not what's worth sacrificing for. We're going to do a blowout Sunday thing that requires tons of volunteers so the church can grow, so more people can come on Sunday. So we need more volunteers so more people can come on Sunday.
Right.
I just got to tell you, I'm not bleeding for that.
Right.
I'm not bleeding for event Christianity and volunteer exhaustion. I am bleeding for radical discipleship, the mission of Jesus, culture of prayer, the Jesus stuff. And so again, when you plant, I think those metrics are really, really important, because we've all learned it is possible to be successful in American evangelical culture and a failure in the kingdom of God. And I do not want to burn for that.
What's the advice for younger? I mean, it's so funny for me at 46 years old now. I definitely am finding myself a little bit more. I actually love the next generation leaders that are coming up. I think we were around a bunch of them this week. They are sharp. They are passionate. They are further along than I was. And yet, as a legit father in the kingdom right now, in experience and age and all that, I am looking a little bit and saying, hey, don't lose, make sure that you understand or you embrace that pioneer spirit. Some of it's just culture around them. We were mentioning this, I think, to Sam Chan, but there is a spirit of entitlement that we just have to just recognize and call out. There is a sense that listen, I don't want to get into politics and socialism, but there's just a whole thing around this thing of you deserve this and you deserve this. I was talking that there's literally billboards, that there's advertisements that take the vacation you deserve.
Right.
And there's the concept of I deserve and I deserve. And so then that kind of begins to bleed into the young leaders in the church. And I'm like, you're missing something.
So entitlement is the enemy of the pioneering spirit.
Yeah.
Right? In a sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember for me, when I was young, and I was in prayer one time praying. I was so frustrated because certain things that I wanted to happen weren't happening yet or fast enough that I felt the Lord had spoke to me about. And I was just praying, and I stopped for a second and realized I'm praying as if God owes me my destiny. I'm praying as if God owes me what he said to me, or my destiny, or the vision, or whatever else. And that concept, just realizing God doesn't owe me a thing. He doesn't owe me a thing. If he asked me to go pastor a group of 20 teenagers for the rest of my life in the middle of nowhere, completely unknown, then that's what I owe him. He doesn't owe me anything. Jon, as you're working in you guys have been in massive pioneer mode. I mean, honestly, the reason why I have you on here is because you've been in pioneer mode, and I think you're wired for it already. That thing, a big Sunday would do nothing to satisfy
But you also have to stay in pioneer
but that's
mode
what I'm
in
saying.
New York City.
But also
You
New
can't
York
get out of
City
it.
is just a natural, like, it's really hard to
Yeah.
get a building. You're constantly having to change. But as you're working with young leaders, what would your advice, encouragement, challenge, kind of call to them be in this kind of pioneer spirit?
Well, it is, we're 17 years in, and this year is the first year I've had a permanent lease. And what I mean by a permanent lease is a place that I can call mine for 24 hours a day. But it's a temporary fragile lease because it can be cancelled within 90 days. So it's a permanent fragile lease. I talked to my real estate
I'm not sure that's called permanent, but I get what you're saying. I love that.
for me.
Permanent fragile lease.
That's a New York. It's permanent,
But it's fragile.
It's they have to give us 90-day notice.
90 days is nice. So anyway, I said, how much do I need for the building we need for our church? He said, I don't know, man, 150. I was like, what, 150 million? He goes, yeah, 150, I think you'd get it done. I was just like, okay. So, it's just, it's absurdities. So yeah, it's public schools and it's pack up and tear up. What would I say to younger folks? I live in a very transient place. People are always leaving. It's always too expensive. Two things. Number one, you've got to draw on the inexhaustible well of the love of God poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit. Like, you've got to abide in Jesus' love. Out of your innermost being will flow rivers of living water. You have to do everything within your power not to let busyness or bitterness block that well, because that well is the only thing that will keep you sane. Secondly, I would say ministry is people. So I actually said to my wife last night, yesterday was like a super long day. And I said to my wife, isn't it insane that after all of these years in New York, we have nothing to show for it?
Yeah.
Like, you can't pull up to my building and say, is that yours? Like, no, that'll be gone. I feel like I'm walking around a ghost town of memories. I said, except people.
Right.
Like, we have so many people whose lives have been deeply impacted and changed. Right. And they come back later and they say, you know what? 5 years ago, I left New York, and now I, with some distance, realize it was the richest spiritual time of my life. So I would say this: ministry is people. Yeah. That's it. Minister to whoever is in front of you for as long as you have them. Love them, equip them, and you're only responsible for the season that God gives you with them. And so take it as a gift, accept His sort of sovereign plan in their lives, and love them in that process. It's hard though.
Yeah. Doug, what would you say?
Well, I mean, I just want to ask Jon, like, where does, and
you
again,
you would say a question to Jon?
I hate to go back to
You're
this,
good.
but
You're
like,
good. I'm kidding.
But like theology. Do you find that church planners right now and their theology, are they missing something? And I'm always bringing things back to theology, so I need to get out of my own head. But like, what is where do they need to be theological? Is it like a redemptive thing? Everything is redemptive. What would you say to a group of church planners who just don't have great theology? Because if they're going to church plant without some kind of a theological anchor, is that going to catch up with them, even if they start with 1,000 people?
Well, you've got to have I mean, life is too hard for bad theology.
Right.
You can't preach snippets from the wisdom literature and build serious disciples.
Right.
Pioneers face spiritual resistance. Right. So you're going to have a good theology of spiritual warfare, not a wacky one, and you're going to have a theology of suffering. And so if you only have a theology of victory and you don't have a theology of betrayal, disappointment. You think about Paul when like I said, Paul is classic in Ephesus. Citywide revival. They've touched the economy. They've bent Ephesus towards redemption. It's wild. Right. He's doing extra special miracles. But at the same time, when he talks in 2 Corinthians, he says, we despaired of life itself. So the cost of the revival was soul level pain from the warfare. So you have to have a theology of that. And I think a lot of younger folks don't. I think a lot of younger folks, to be honest with you, plant with too many options. Right. So it's like, hey, we're going to see how this will go. If this doesn't work, I'm going to drop back, be a teaching pastor here, roll in with my friend over there. Yeah. So, you do need to build the theology where you have a lack and that takes real maturity because you don't think you need it at the time. I'll say this: good theology is coming for you, man.
Good theology
You may not value it now, but it's coming for you.
It's coming for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, I started at 42, but a little later. But as I look back, if I would have had and I think as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate this because I look back at some of my mistakes and relationship breakdowns and leadership challenges. And I'm thinking, if I would have just had some kind of a guiding biblical theology on how to handle those things, but maybe those things just aren't as important until you get a little older because it doesn't sound as sexy. You know what I mean?
Well, yes, I'll say this. Let me just say this.
Yeah.
If you're young, God is not committed to your ministry success. And you got to get that in your spirit. He's just not committed to you being successful. And if he's committed to you being like Jesus, he's committed to you doing the mission. He's committed to the call on your life. He's committed to the good works prepared in advance. But that does not mean that you will be successful in the way that perhaps you're thinking. There's no promise that in your loose network, you're going to be invited up to share with others how to do it. Doesn't mean you're going to be on the Jesus Culture podcast because you're an example to whatever. And I think we are going to get a shock in the day of judgment. I think I've said this before. I said it to Banning. I was like, honestly, in the morning, I think of two people. I think of the woman leading a house church in Iran who risks getting raped every time she leaves her house to follow Jesus. And I think, gosh, I'm going to stand in front of her and my life is a fantasy compared to what she risks to follow Jesus. And then I think about house church leaders in China. It's just getting harder and harder for them. And we're going to show up on the day of judgment. We're going to be standing in line and they're going to say, tell me about your pioneering. And it was like, yeah, man, lattes went to $7 during inflation. I'm being a little facetious, but you know what I mean?
Somebody left my church because they didn't like. Yeah.
And I'm just like, so we got to keep that in mind. Who are you measuring against yourself? Hebrews 12. So we're going to fix our eyes on Jesus, who, it says here, for the joy set before me endured the cost. It says, so that we don't grow weary and lose heart. Jesus is success. Jesus' culture is success, the culture of love and sacrifice. Jesus' ministry wasn't that successful at the time.
Yeah.
After he rose from the dead, he could only get 120 out of the 500 to show up to his prayer thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But now there's a couple billion of us. So just get your eyes on faithfulness.
Yeah. I think it's why it's so important that we keep going back to this, but intimacy and obedience for me, and I would throw in community as well, probably. But that thing of just intimacy, keeping that flame alive in my life of just deep, passionate love for Jesus, willing to do anything, willing to risk everything for him, willing to be unseen and unknown and go do what he tells me to do. And then the obedience issue. I'm convinced that if you just stay in obedience mode, you will consistently be in risk-taking pioneer spots. I'm convinced that Jesus is not leading you into places of comfort and safety. He's just constantly leading you into places where you have to rely on him. I share this a little bit. I'm in, after I guess I'm 28 years into full-time vocational ministry, and I'm more in over my head now than I've ever been in my life. Without even a doubt.
But that's a pioneering spirit.
Without even a question.
Yeah.
I am in more over my head right now.
Amen.
Getting before the Lord saying, God, I don't... everything with like, I hope you picked the right guy to like, if you don't show up, this doesn't work out, to there's so much uncertainty, so far in over my head, stretched beyond capability type stuff. And I just think I think it's that intimacy that breeds obedience. And then ultimately for me, it's the right people around you too. It's the people that look at you and go, you're playing it safe. Knock it off, because they're not connected to the emotions of it. They're not. They're able to see it a little bit more objectively. And but man, this is what I find for me. It is actually, am I allowed to say petrifying? I don't want to be too dramatic. I remember when we went to Chicago in 2011. it was the biggest step we'd ever taken in ministry. Nobody in our circles had ever done this before.
That thing was amazing.
We were going from maybe a conference costing us $100,000 to this costing us $1.2 million. I'm 35 years old. We just said we said yes 2 years before, because you kind of have to say yes that far in advance. We said yes before we had the favor or momentum that was going to be needed, right? Anyways, we're $200,000 short as we get into this event, which was just, I mean, it's a lot of money right now, but it was just a massive amount of money for us. And I remember walking around Chicago overwhelmed. I was just literally crying. I was crying, just saying, and I remember just thinking, this was the position for me. I remember thinking, you know what? This may be the thing that ends our ministry. But at least I said yes. This was literally like, this was the thing I said, but at least I said yes. And I'll be able to stand before you one day. And I remember just recently now, that's, 11 years removed, but just trying to be in that place. Am I positioning myself where like, this may not work out, but at least I'll be able to stand before God one day and say, I said yes. Yeah. And that type of...
So do you feel the responsibility, Banning, then to be creating atmospheres where that pioneering yes spirit is cultivated? Right? Because I look around and I'm thinking, who's cultivating that? I love Andy Bird and what he's done. You can't be there at YWAM and not be just completely immersed in a yes pioneering spirit, right? Are you committed to that kind of an atmosphere?
I think I've talked to you about this, John. YWAM for me, because if we can create an atmosphere where, and what John's talking about, when John says, God's not interested in your ministry success. Like, that's not what he's building. But I'm saying when he says that, the concept is we have to redefine success across the board. Right. We just have to flat out say we have a wrong definition of success. We have to redefine success. And much of success is, I don't want to get to the end of my life and be at the end of my life and look back and say, I never really did anything that required faith. I kind of just did the same. I never really did anything that required faith. I just did things where it was guaranteed success, where people were there and money was there. And so for me, trying to create an atmosphere where people are where young people are actually not just are thinking about eternity, but are thinking about when they're 90. They're actually like, when I'm 90 years old, sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, like when I look back over my life, because here's the crazy thing about Sundays. You want to know why it's not a metric right now? Because you will not be talking about how big your Sundays were when you're 90 years old. When you're 90s, you will not be talking about. You will never even come up in a conversation of how many people were attending your church in 2022, in August of 2022, on that one Sunday. It won't even be in your conversation. That's right. But here's the YWAM. How do we cultivate this? This is a great question for churches, because churches... I mentioned this to John. Churches we pay people. So this is a little bit of the difficult part for me. YWAM, Lauren Cunningham, brilliant in my opinion. Brilliant. Here's the model. There's no money involved. So that's been eliminated. So somebody comes and says, I want to reach Muslims in Jordan. He's like, love it. Go do it. Boom. We commission you, send you. We're not giving you any money. But we're commissioning you, sending you, saying, go. And now all of a sudden, it's this natural filter. You either have it or you don't have it. You're either a pioneer or you're not a pioneer. Yeah. We're going to find out. It's a sink or swim. Every single situation is a sink or swim. It's either you're going to figure out whether or not you really believe it's the call of God. You're going to figure out whether you know how to go talk to people and get some money, whether you can stick it out in Jordan. And YWAM just filters all of these people down to, well, here's the one. We just said, yes, go. We're not giving you any money. We're not going to actually make it, but just go. And if you make it, man, we're just well done. And how do we do that in the church? I honestly don't know how to. I don't know how to create that type of sink or swim in the church.
I'll say one thing I think it's important to understand. With fivefold gifting, not every. So I want to say this. Yeah. I think two things are happening. I don't want to moralize pioneering. Like, if you're not pioneering, I don't want to create a two-tier Christian system. Radical pioneers and then people following Jesus. I want everybody to live at that redemptive edge, and that redemptive edge is the place of darkness around you where the kingdom is being extended. It has to be enforced. So I just want to say that as a caveat. But what I want to say is, like, what you're hitting on and poking around is this: nobody's calling for the pioneers anymore. That's what's missing. We're actually rarely giving that pioneer call. What people are calling for is self-care. Do you know what I mean? Like the great dominant call is not for like, Jesus is worth it. Give your life away for him. What we're saying is like, the world's a damaging, scary place. Self-care is the solution. And look, mate, I have like, name a kind of abuse or trauma, and I promise you my family's dealt with it. We've been through, bankruptcy, incarceration, sexual assault. Just like the whole thing, like this stuff is bleeding through our family. So I'm not minimizing the importance of it. But I think we need to get back to calling people to pioneers. So we even need environments, and that's what Andy's done. Like literally with my son. My son was at another school doing well socially, but his heart was dying a little bit. And I went and preached for Andy at YWAM, and I said, I got to get my son in this environment.
Yes.
Sure enough, he goes there. Next thing you know, it's like the Lord sending me to Turkey. He's in Turkey. He's in Turkey. That's it. I was like, so how do you create that? So number one, I wanted to say,
how do you create that in the
moralize that?
Yeah, in the church.
I think we create it by reclaiming the vision of living by faith. When I hear you talk, you're talking about living by faith.
Right.
And everybody is called to live by faith. Not everybody's a psychotic pioneer. I believe there's a gifting that comes with that, but everybody is called to live by faith. And I love that, the old Wimber, it's faith is spelled RASK. We've got to get people to say, follow the promptings. You might be in the supermarket and God's saying, pray for that dude's arm. You might be at the checkout and you give that word of knowledge. We've just got to activate faith and obedience everywhere we go. And then we've got to tell those stories, and they've got to be celebrated in our midst. Here's the story of Stacy. She's a homeschool mom. And when she had one of her kids at the park, the Lord said to her, see that woman on the bench? She's going through a divorce. Go pray for her. And Stacy walks over. That is pioneering the kingdom at a park. So yeah, I think we change the stories we tell.
Yeah, change the stories we tell. That is interesting. Some of the stories we're not telling. I mean, I remember stories of just, it is true. I love the don't moralize the pioneer thing. I think for me, I am just talking about live with that edge of obedience that is risk-taking.
Yes.
Not everybody has to go hack through jungles and make a new path and but that type of living with that edge, that safety is not the number one goal. Above all, we live like this. Above all else, I have to create safety.
I think one of the risks is with church planters is I've run into this. I think some church planters believe that pioneering a church is their safety net. Like they actually think that by pioneering a church, they're going to have financial security, they're going to have more friends, and they're going to have a certain kind of leadership reputation. And it's fulfilling something in them that I think isn't accurate. Do you think that's true?
Yeah. It's just, I am having these conversations about how do we keep this type of risk-taking, obedience born out of love, a life of faith. But here's the also scary part. There's a whole ton of pioneers that are how do I say this? I also are thinking like, dude, you're just being an idiot. You're independent. You're isolated.
Yeah, there's
you're
that
making
too.
Dumb decisions. Right. You're just stepping out. You're making messes everywhere. Right. So, but how do we cultivate that type of environment? How do I not, just for me personally, and maybe it's just coming out of this pandemic and things I feel the Lord asked me, how do I not fall into that place of like safety? It's kind of crazy, right? You have a building now. I have something to lose at another level than I did before we owned the building.
Right.
Like that's just the reality. Like there was like there might be loss involved, but it wasn't a building. Well, now there's a building, and now there's this, and now there's that. And so how do I not slip away from that edge of just following Jesus, obedience, pioneer escape? But then for me, what we're talking about, how do we in the church, how do we raise up leaders who have this thing,
and that's
who aren't just independent?
Yeah, and that's where the church is at, right? I think this is the call that we need to put out to the church right now. Coming out of this last season, if we don't get that back, we might miss an incredible opportunity to see God move in a really significant way.
Well, and also, Jon, you're further down the road because I'm saying New York is further down the road of secular humanism, anti-Christ type thing. But I'm in California, and I don't want to be dramatic, but you full on are like, no, we live in Babylon. And you're going to have some level of grit and determination and obedience and faith and risk. Like there's not and I'm not saying if you live outside those places, it doesn't take that. I don't think anybody's listening to this. I don't feel like I have to qualify every one of my statements. But where we are headed in many ways, and I'm believing God for an outpouring of the Holy Spirit, a move of the Holy Spirit revival, but as things get darker, we have to raise up leaders that have this type of like faith in them. Have this
fire and faith.
Not just that everything's going to be comfortable and safe and easy. And you're right. This is a very Western thing. What he's describing. This is not a podcast.
No.
Like if you're in Iran or China or like even India with a lot of stuff they're passing. Like you're not this podcast. You're probably just chuckling at us right now about the conversation we're having.
Yeah, the independent spirit is an important thing to address because a defiant, unaccountable spirit is not the spirit of Jesus. So because sometimes pioneers, the tendencies, they can have self-righteous. No one sacrifices or follows Jesus except me or like me. So I think that is something that you've got to guard against. Number two, the amount of betrayal often that comes with pioneering, or people simply leaving because they can't sustain the pace. That can sometimes produce bitterness in your heart towards people. So then you start getting, self-righteous and bitter. And then a kind of entitlement comes along, which is, that's when I think the entitlement is different for a pioneer. Because he starts saying, well, I've sacrificed so much for the Lord, therefore it's time I reaped what I've sown and sacrificed. And so, all of those things, you've got to guard your heart against all of those things. I'm just a big believer. When Jesus says in Revelation 2, do the things you did at first, like I think all the time, like I've got a pretty complicated life, a busy schedule. I'm juggling a lot of things. I woke up this morning and I just thought, okay, what am I doing today? Here's what I'm doing. Cultivating, burning love for Jesus. That's my goal today. So I'm going to do a lot of things, but underneath it all, Jesus, this is for you, out of love, as an offering. And when we get away from that, when it becomes about anything other than like burning faithful love to his person and mission, it's over. So I think the longer you're in, the more you have to get back to that first principle of devotion. And to me, that requires a lot of discipline to be able to do it, because Satan wants to sever you from the source and let entitlement, self-righteousness, bitterness, lack of accountability, all of that stuff get in. And we're going to guard against it.
Well, Doug, any last thoughts as we wrap up? Such a rich conversation.
No, I wish we could unpack a little bit more, some of the church planning stuff like betrayal. I mean, that's another conversation.
Season 4, baby.
But, some of that is so important, because how you handle things like betrayal and people leaving and all the practical pioneering stuff, those can have a huge impact on you as a leader and on your church. They can bury your church, right? So, but it's for another day.
Season 4, there's going to be maybe if we get picked up for season 4, who knows?
No, I love this. I sit here, I feel like I'm having a sandwich at Cat's Deli right now.
Yeah, totally.
And being told to like it or get out. You know what I mean? That's my. No, this has been great. Super rich.
Yeah.
Very rich.
Here's my closing thought, though you didn't ask me to give one.
Yeah.
I didn't.
This is what I would say. I'd say, when it's all said and done, I think we're all going to say Jesus was worth whatever it cost.
Yes.
Like when we stand before Jesus face to face, we're going to go, I wish I went harder.
Yeah.
You are so worth it.
Yeah.
You really are the treasure buried. You're really the pearl. Like you're really worth leveraging everything for.
Yes.
And so to try and live out of that reality right now makes you feel a little insane, but it's the kind of spiritual insanity that I think we're called to. It's a different value system. So if we can keep the beauty of Jesus alive in our heart, I tell people in our church, you don't organize your life around what you believe, you organize your life around what you love. And cultivating love at the center of it That's the whole goal. So hopefully this podcast has made people think it's worth it because he's worth it.
right.
And that's the whole goal.
I love it.
Amen.
Well, thank you for joining us for this
Awesome.
this episode on season 3. Really great to have you. We really do believe in you guys and just believe in the ones that are in the trenches. And we get it. We're here. We understand it, and we're just walking with you, and just hopefully you feel encouraged and challenged like we mentioned. All right, guys, listen, go back, listen to season 1, season 2. Jon has a great one in season 2 on deconstruction, and season 1, season 2, the rest of season 3, and it's just really good to have you. We'll do it again.